Good morning, Trump's family. Welcome back to my channel. Have a good day, everyone, and God bless you. Alright, the following is a collection of news from Patriots. Now we will come to today's news. And Democrats across the country are panicking to the point where they thought they had safe seats are now very competitive, and may look like it's going a Republicans' way. We know the Democrats have funding has already pulled out of states like Florida and Ohio, because of how bad they are losing there and trying to focus. It's on somebody's closer races, like in New York where they did not think they would have to be defending as hard, but it looks like they're going to have to because this thing is going to come down to the wire in the state of New York. So if you're a New York resident, and if you haven't voted yet, make sure you go cast your ballot for Lee Zeldin in New York, an opportunity to change the course of directory of that state of how it's been plagued with crime and everything else. The COVID insanity that has gripped that state, you have an opportunity to roll back some of that stuff with the election of Lee Zeldin there in the state of New York. So let's dive into what we have here. It says Republican Lee Zeldin pulls ahead of Kathy Hochul in New York State's governor's race, after he promises to block the COVID mandates on children. Of course the selection is real clear here. You can't make it any more clear. When you have one candidate who's running for the Democrats for another term, Kathy Hochul, who wants to continue to mask your kids, and continue to force vax-mac mandates, allow crime to continue to rise across the state of New York, and reward criminals and punish the victims, or you can vote for Lee Zeldin, who's against all of this stuff. Therefore, let's go and take a look at some of the numbers here. Republican Lee Zeldin took the lead over Crazy Kathy in the latest traffic car poll. Lee Zeldin currently holds a 48.4 to 47.6 lead in the New York Good gubernatorial race. Of course, that's huge. Look at that, Lee's yelling into her out. But this doesn't matter. These polls do not matter unless you go and vote. That's what's going to matter. Right, 4% are still undecided. That can really swing it one way. At least Elder will not allow forced COVID max vaccine mandates on the children in New York State. He stated that, of course, he wants to fight the rising crime in the state of New York, and roll back a lot of these institutions or these things that the Democrats have done in the state and roll them back. So it'll be interesting to see how this plays down in the midterms as we approach 1 week from the midterms right now. So if you have not yet cast your ballot, I'm going to go on election day myself. On election day, I'm going to go vote in person and vote for my governor here in the state of Florida, who is Ron DeSantis. So hopefully you guys will do the same out there in New York. You will vote for Lee Zeldin and vote for like it matters, because it does. So do your part out there. Take a friend, take a family member, and make sure you guys are voting red down the ticket on this one because it's that important. And this is some big news. Holy bombshell, folks. Do I have a big story for you guys from The Intercept? We all remember Joe Biden's Ministry of Truth, his disinformation board headed by his disinformation czar. I forget her name. Let me Google it really quick. Oh, yes, Nina Jankowicz awakes. We remember the disaster of Joe Biden's disinformation board. It was such a deeply controversial, unpopular move that the Biden administration supposedly axed the project a couple of weeks later. Well, it seems as though you may have been duped. The DHS did technically dissolve the board and technically remove Anita Jankowicz from her position. But it seems as though that may have just been a PR move to conveniently used in a Jankowicz to throw her under the bus to make it seem as if they were scrapping the project, but really behind the scenes, they kept it going. And we now have a massive bombshell piece from The Intercept that shows that the DHS had never actually stopped this project, and Joe Biden's Ministry of Truth project is still very much within the works. Let me show you guys what's going on here with some incredible reporting from The Intercept. Alright folks, take a look at this. Truth Cops leaked documents outline DHS's plan to police disinformation. The Department of Homeland Security is quietly broadening its efforts to curb speech it considers dangerous. An investigation by The Intercept has found years of internal DHS memos, emails and documents obtained via leaks and ongoing lawsuits, as well as public documents, illustrate an expansive effort by the agency to influence tech platforms. The work, much of which remains unknown to the American public, came into clear review earlier this year when the DHS announced a new Disinformation Governance Board, a panel designed to police misinformation, false information spread unintentionally, disinformation, false information spread intentionally, and malinformation, factual information shared typically out of context with harmful intent that allegedly threatens us interests. While the board was widely ridiculed, immediately scaled back and then shut down within a few months. Other initiatives are underway as DHS pivots to monitoring social media now that its original mandate, the war on terror, has been wound down behind closed doors and through pressure on private platforms. The U.S. government has its power to shape online discourse. According to meeting minutes and other records appended to a lawsuit filed by Missouri Attorney General Eric Schmidt, a Republican who is also running for Senate, discussions have ranged from the scale and scope of government intervention in online discourse to the mechanics of streamlining takedown requests for false or intentionally misleading information. Platforms have got to get comfortable with government. It's really interesting how hesitant they remain. Microsoft executive Matt Masterson, a former DHS official, texted Jen Easterly, a DHS director, in February in March meeting Laura Dead Blow. An FBI official warned that the threat of subversive information on social media could undermine support for the U.S. government. Dem Low, according to the notes of the discussion attended by senior executives from Twitter, J.P. Morgan Chase, stressed that, quote, "We need media infrastructure that is held accountable. Everything seems to be coming full circle. Remember, Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton were doing an anti-disinformation media tour, multiple events popping up across the country warning about the threat of online misinformation, and advocating for more government intervention and government powers to police speech online. And then a couple of weeks later, Joe Biden launches his disinformation board. It seems to be all connected, folks. The feds want to take control of the internet. They want to control the narrative. And they're using national interest and national security as an excuse. I mean, if it really was just to combat the Russians and combat terrorist groups that want to do you harm, that'd be one thing. But of course, considering what we know about the history of the federal government, the language and the terminology that they use is purposely vague. What it really is another excuse to tap into all of the data that social media companies are collecting on you in order to expand the domestic spy network that they've already started in the early 2000s. That's what's really going on here. And there also seems to be a political motivation here which, surprise, surprise, surprise to absolutely no one, always seems to benefit the Democrat Party and Democrat establishment. The big takeaway from all of the leaks that we're seeing so far is the connection between social media giants and the federal government. We have a leaked text message here between the Department of Homeland Security and Microsoft. This is the text message that contains the quote that I read earlier in the article. "Thanks so much, really appreciate it. And sorry, it didn't ring last week. I think you were on the call this week, just trying to get us in a place where the federal government can work with platforms to better understand the myths/dis trends so relevant agencies can try to pre-bunk/debunk is useful, not our mission, but was looking to play a coordination role. So not every D/A is independently reaching out to platforms, which could cause a lot chaos. Was on the call. The coordination is greatly appreciated. Was disappointed that platforms, including us, didn't offer more. We'll get there, and sector leadership had zero questions. We'll get there. And that kind of leadership really helps. Platforms have got to get more comfortable with the government. It's really interesting how hesitant they remain, again, Microsoft included. And so what this exposes is that the federal government is having active calls with tech oligarchs in Silicon Valley and all the big tech companies, and they're working together to, quote, fight myths and disinformation trends and pre-bunk/debunk as useful folks. It always goes back to the same story over and over again. This is how you know they cannot be trusted. And this whole thing is blowing up, and it shows just how deeply connected the tech companies and the federal government really are behind the scenes. When it comes to the censorship trends, it always comes back to the Hunter Biden laptop story. Mark Zuckerberg on Joe Rogan's podcast a couple months ago gave us the first glimpse. Federal agencies worked with Silicon Valley tech giants in the 2020 election to pre-bunk and debunk as was useful to them to undermine the electoral process in the 2020 election. They worked together. They colluded together to the benefit of the Democratic establishment and Puppet Joe. They claim that it's in the U.S.'s national security interest when really it was in the deep state Democrat establishment electoral interest. We're seeing reports that these massive tech platforms are meeting with federal agents and federal agencies on a constant basis throughout the year. And the question is really, how deep does the rabbit hole go? Over the last 2 years, coincidentally, after Donald Trump was banned, and every single massive tech company instilled the same misinformation policies of what you can and what you can't say on those platforms all at the same time. The question is, How involved was the federal government behind those decisions? In other words, there's a possibility that the federal government is using tech companies as proxies to control political speech online, all in the benefit of mainstream media narratives, all in the benefit of Democrat political narratives and talking points. There is seemingly a massive conspiracy here involving the federal government as a key player behind all of the censorship that we have seen, all the big tech censorship moves over the last couple of years. That is a massive, massive bombshell and surprise to absolutely no one. The only group that's reporting on it is The Intercept. Nothing from mainstream media sources. This is once again one of the biggest scandals. One of the biggest stories currently bouncing around, and you have to look for it to find it. You have to be within a specific circle that's following this type of stuff to even be aware of it. I mean, it's just truly stunning. And what's the scariest part? You know, we talk a whole lot about Joe Biden politicizing the FBI, the DHS and the DOJ and the CIA, of course, but it seems as though these agencies were politicized, and rogue actors working for Democrat interest, of course, even when Donald Trump was in office. Now Hunter Biden laptop story is the biggest example. It's not just the media bias and social media bias. It's also the federal government outside of the office of the presidency in Congress. There is a massive authoritarian shadow regime that is working to control information, control speech and control narratives during election cycles. And then they go on the news every single night over and over again, talking about mug democracy. Does that sound like a genuine democracy to you? Let me ask you that the answer is unequivocally no. It does not. The corruption is much deeper than most people understand. They call Donald Trump a conspiracy theorist for talking about the deep state, but it's no conspiracy, folks. It's right here in front of your very eyes. Alright, thanks for being here, folks. Please receive a big hug from all of us. Let me know down below if